So just to sort of baseline those who may not actually know much about AWS Direct Connect, in its simplest form, it is a platform that allows you to create a 1 gig or a 10 gig fiber cross connect from any of our 9 regions around the world to one of our 11 Direct Connect facilities within close proximity to those regions. And via help of our partners, the ability to have sub-gigabit speeds all the way from 500 megabits down as low as 50 megabits. So whether or not you're talking about co-locating inside of one of these facilities or creating networks of 50, 100, 500 different remote locations into a broad, wide area network, AWS Direct Connect can help you design an IT architecture to really deliver scale at the network level. And there are several reasons that we see people making the move to Direct Connect. So first off is really this is cost. So this is just a simple chart showing the price difference moving data across the public internet versus AWS Direct Connect. So we think that the pricing, obviously, on public internet transfer is incredibly aggressive. It starts at 12.5 cents per gig and goes down from there. And as always, transferring data into AWS is always free. But then transferring it out, we actually, again, in the US East, it varies region to region, as low as 2 cents per gig to transfer data out across Direct Connect. So if you're looking at workloads that are driving 10, 20, 40, 100 gig, or even terabytes of data, 10, 20, hundreds of terabytes of data out of AWS, there's real opportunity for operational savings by making the move to AWS Direct Connect. The second reason that we see people making the move is really about consistent network performance. And you'll hear Roger talk about it and what Level 3 brings to the table as well. But with AWS Direct Connect, you no longer have to put your packets on the public internet and hope that they have some level of performance without any guarantee of jitter protection, without any guarantee of latency, and doing it in such a way that you just can't run highly latency-sensitive applications on AWS. And the third thing is this focus on elasticity. So whether you start with 1 gigabit connection to do a very simple workload, maybe one application, all the way to multiple 10 gigabit connections in order to support really all of the applications in your business. 2,000, 3,000 applications within your business, all operating in unison with your on-premises resources in AWS. Direct Connect gives you that flexibility. So what are some different ways that we see people approaching? Or what are some of the different architectures that we see people making the move to Direct Connect for? So sort of the simplest, the one that people get in the door with, is simple backup and recovery and archive, right? So if you're moving, there we go. If you're moving 10 terabytes a day, 20 terabytes a day out to tape now, you're sending that to a cave, and Lord only knows if you're going to get it back if you have to recover. Instead, you can look at using AWS Storage Gateway or copying directly out to S3 and Glacier across big fat pipes that Direct Connect provides. Something you really can't do unless you're really talking about SneakerNet with our AWS import-export service to ship terabytes and terabytes of data on a regular basis into AWS. Others of you may be looking at AWS as your play into big data, whether it be the Internet of Things, whether it be a manufacturing company. I was actually talking to a customer recently. They have a large manufacturing floor. Every single piece of manufacturing equipment generates 30 different data points every single second. So they're streaming in tons of data. And not only that, they're then processing that data, bringing that data back out, also in large chunks coming back onto their on-premises. So they can make predictive analytics, really important decisions, purchasing decisions, repair decisions around their manufacturing fleet. Others of you, and I imagine a lot of you may be in this position where, hey, you know what, I just capitalized $10 million in storage, or I have reliance on non-86 hardware. x86 hardware, or I have mainframes. I have an AS400. I talked to a customer recently that just bought a brand new mainframe. Oh, I didn't realize you could buy those anymore. But they did, and so they said, we have to keep using this for a long time. 10 years, 5 years, whatever that number is. We need a tool like Direct Connect that can help us link our multiple sites and our primary and alternate data center to AWS and continue leveraging these pieces. And lastly, maybe you're looking at AWS Direct Connect to really drive that consistent networking performance, something that video and voice are really demanding services, really require network sensitivity, low latency, consistent latency, packet delivery, jitter control. All of those pieces are part of the video and voice. And whether, again, you're connecting just your corporate headquarters to your primary data center, or potentially realistically connecting hundreds of different remote locations across an MPLS, and then bridging those back to AWS, Direct Connect gives you that flexibility. So hopefully, some of you in here have said, hey, you know what, that's great. I like what you're talking about. I want to explore this Direct Connect thing. I want to deploy it. I have applications that you've said. I have applications that you've not said. I have everything in between. So how do we go? What is the next step in order to do this? So let's do sort of at the top, and Level 3 is going to give us some information about telecommunications. But as we said, so Direct Connect provides that connection in 11 facilities. And we've partnered with 5, what we really consider Tier 1 co-location facilities in the world. Equinix in many locations, Terramark in Brazil, CoreSite in both London and New York, Arcom in Dublin, and the Telecity Group in London. Sorry, Arcom in Dublin and Telecity Group in London. And what you may notice is some of those are in direct proximity to the regions that they cover. So Equinix in Northern Virginia directly maps out to our US East region. There's a couple of additional ones in there. For example, we don't have a region in New York, so our CoreSite facility does that. Same with London, and the same with our Los Angeles locations, really to focus on connectivity for high-tech zones that may not be within close proximity of our regions. But some of you looked at that and said, that doesn't work for me. I have data centers that are in South Africa. I have data centers that are in Bangalore. I have lots of offices across the US, maybe in Dallas. I'm nowhere near you right now, but I still want to get the power and the flexibility that Direct Connect can give me. I still want that consistent network performance to approach a really hybrid IT architecture. And so this is where our partners come in. And we have a large partner ecosystem that's already out there. Some of that you see on the screen, Zio, CoreSite, Equinix, obviously Level 3. We have a list of those partners out at our site, aws.amazon.com/directconnect/partners. And we definitely recommend that you go out. And if you have relationships with these partners already, it gives you an easy onboarding and to use it. If you don't have relationships with these partners, you can certainly do it yourself. I will say there is oftentimes no shortage of horror stories that can be told using telecom providers that maybe don't know what they're doing. And so this is where we really look to the expertise of our partners, not just understanding Direct Connect, but their unique ability to understand your specific network infrastructure and your specific network needs and tailor a solution for you. So with that, I'd like to invite Roger to come out here. Again, he's the Senior Director of Cloud Connect Solutions at Level 3, which was actually just announced about 3 weeks ago. A big announcement, I should say, with the Cloud Connect Solutions. And he'll speak a little bit about what Level 3 gives and ways you can think about telecommunications.
Thanks, Steve. Can I get a quick show of hands? How many folks in the room are actual users of AWS today? OK, that's a pretty big percentage. How many folks are kicking the tires and thinking, I might use AWS soon? OK. And then how many of you think that the applications you're putting into the cloud are either sensitive to network performance or the applications themselves really sensitive to the user experience? OK, also a pretty big percentage. So Steve just shared a bunch of different use cases where AWS Direct Connect could be valuable. But you might still be asking, okay, so how does the network really fit into this? What does the network have to do with it? As a network operator, we were actually asking ourselves the same thing. From the beginning, when cloud started to emerge as a trend, we were wondering, this pervasive, easy, inexpensive access to the internet is really helping to fuel the adoption of the cloud. How does the private network fit in? Turns out it fits in quite well. As we were seeing AWS adoption pick up in other cloud services, we were finding an increasing number of trouble tickets on our network. But they weren't for the kind of typical SLA outage or violation. It was actually for minor changes in network performance. We even had a customer escalate all the way up to our CEO for a change in network performance that was about 15 milliseconds. To put that in perspective, we can go coast to coast in about 40 milliseconds or under. So that was just a small change in network performance. Turns out it had a pretty dramatic effect on their application. We actually have another large healthcare customer who's got a data center in Phoenix, and they have to serve hospitals all up and down the West Coast, and their application won't work if it's any more than 30 millisecond round trip time. So it turns out that the network actually has a lot to do with it. So there are a number of different applications, and they all have different profiles in terms of latency sensitivity. So there are things like storage area networks and server virtualization, which are highly sensitive to minor changes in network performance. But then there are even the applications that are seemingly easy, they're seemingly insensitive to latency changes or other issues with network performance. However, the user experience isn't. If you've got business users that are experiencing downtime or any kind of issues with their email or voice, you're creating, there's lots of concern, lots of outrage, right? So double-clicking on that a little bit, and we look at some of the common activities that you're doing as you virtualize various activities into the cloud, whether it's virtual machines or storage, whether you're doing a migration or an update. And you have to think about what kind of network connection do I need. So in addition to sensitivity to quality of service, you also have to think about how much bandwidth you need and what's the flow of what's the duration or the flow of this bandwidth. And again, as I was saying, you've got to be really cognizant of what the latency is and what the applications are willing to tolerate, because even a minor change in latency can have a dramatic impact on the throughput. So this chart shows, for example, you look at 5 milliseconds versus even 10, 20, or 30 milliseconds, and there's a dramatic change in the packet delivery ratio, which impacts your throughput. So all of a sudden, you're having a much less effective network connection. So whether it's latency or packet loss or your effective bandwidth, it's actually slowing the completion time of a lot of the activities that you're putting out in the cloud. And as a result, it's changing your performance, and you have less efficacy of your network. It's costing you more to do it. So it turns out that not all networks are indeed created equally. The public internet, which was really great for helping fuel the adoption of the cloud, turns out great for some applications, but really not sufficient for others because it's best efforts. You never know what you're going to get. Now, private network certainly helps because you've got some dedicated capacity, but not even all networks are necessarily created equally, and you want a high-performance network. So as you're thinking about designing your network, you really have to take a step back. Think about, what are the applications I'm trying to outsource into the cloud? Who's using these applications? Do I have small flows of bandwidth over short periods of time, big flows of bandwidth over long periods of time? Are these things that I need to do real time? Can I batch process them overnight? And how secure do I need the information to be? So this is where level 3 comes in. Just a quick show of hands. Who in the room is familiar with level 3? OK, so about half of you. Turns out we're one of the biggest telecom operators you've never heard of. We're $6.5 billion in revenue. We've spent the last 15 years building a fiber network that can connect 55 countries over 5 continents. So we own and operate our own fiber network. We provide the building blocks on which some of the most ubiquitous cloud services across the globe that you're probably using today are built. We also have taken some communication and media and content delivery capabilities, and we've embedded our network so that we can help enterprises more efficiently deliver their communication and media services. But we also help connect to the clouds. So this is why we developed Level 3 Cloud Connect solutions, because we know that enterprises need a private network ecosystem to connect their offices, their data centers, to leading cloud centers and leading cloud services and other outsourced data centers. And the reason why this is important is because, as we talked about, we know that as you're moving your applications into the cloud and as you're operating those applications, you're moving information back and forth. You need improved performance. And whether it's a dedicated connection, where you can design the redundancy that you need with multiple fiber-based routes and in some instances low latency connections, or whether it's something where you want a sub-gigabit speed and so you're happy with a virtual private network over a hosted connection, we can provide you the kind of latency and performance guarantees that you need. Because it's a private network, it also offers greater security, which probably makes you feel a little bit more confident putting some of your sensitive information into the cloud and moving it back and forth. We also offer flexibility. You still need to have control over the applications and the network that you use to connect to those applications. And whether you're moving your services across the different AWS platforms or across the globe, we offer you connectivity wherever you need it. And then finally, because we offer things like usage-based billing, you only use what you need and you only pay for what you use. And if you're using over shared virtual connections, we can help you reduce the cost of your deployment as well. So just showing you how we kind of fit into the AWS Direct Connect landscape, we're the most connected AWS Direct Connect partner. We can provide reach to every single AWS Direct Connect site across the globe. We offer the private connections, whether they're dedicated connections, so wavelengths, Ethernet private line, or virtual hosted connections, EVPL, IPVPN. We also offer application performance and security solutions as well that you can layer on top of that to have a more robust, complete cloud deployment. With that, I'll hand it back to Steve.
Thank you very much, Roger. So I think Roger actually has to get out of here and catch a flight. So thank him very much for what Level 3 brings. So for the remainder of this talk, and I also want to say, just when we get done with this, I go down and talk to the Level 3 team. There's, some of our other telecom providers are here as well. If you have pre-existing relationships with them, they're down in 632. So I really challenge you, if you are in this world of multi-sites or data centers not near to our Direct Connect locations, or you just say, I need to get a better handle on where my network is right now and what I want to do for the future as I begin to adopt cloud. How do I approach this? And I think Level 3 is uniquely capable of understanding where you're at and how you want to move forward. Sort of for the remainder of this talk, however, we're going to do very nuts and bolts. And there's going to be some assumptions that we built in here and they're kind of assumptions along the lines of if you want to manage kind of your own layer 2, right? So lots of our customers are now providing sort of layer 3 endpoints, and so you can connect directly to them without going through this process of establishing your own cross-connects or you're establishing your own connections. Others are looking at approaching really doing hosted virtual interfaces or hosted direct connect services and really bridging your MPLS. So this is, the remainder of this talk is going to focus, again, on really nuts and bolts. You want to start using it immediately. You're either co-locating or you want to do some kind of transparent layer 2 transport from AWS to your location. And how do you approach that? Both from a sort of simple console, here's what I click and here's what I do, but what are some considerations that you need to have? What are some requirements of the service? And then what are some architecture best practices as I approach Direct Connect? So first off, the easiest thing to do is you simply have to request it. And you will request one for every single circuit that you want to ask. You provide three simple pieces of information: a unique name, the particular location in question that you want to have the Direct Connect circuit provisioned, and finally the port speed in question, either 1 gigabit or 10 gigabit. As we said, it's through our partners that we can provide sub-gigabit speeds from 500 all the way really down to 50 megabits per second, really for those tiny offices that need just some kind of performance-protected bandwidth out of those locations into AWS. A couple of things as well. There's 3 requirements for this connection. This is obviously the location where your physical hardware might be in or where you're going to start that kind of transport connection. 3 requirements and 1 recommendation, I'll tell you. So the requirements are very straightforward. It's single mode fiber, either 1 gigabit or 10 gigabits fiber. So not multi-mode and obviously not copper. And the second thing you need to be able to support, and really everyone can support this, is 802.1 VLANing. So we're going to talk about the virtual interfaces here in a minute, but you actually need to be able to tag that traffic so we can segment it properly as it goes, either into the public or the private side of AWS services. And thirdly, you need to be able to support Border Gateway Protocol. Because with AWS Direct Connect, we have now left the land of switching, and now we're moving into the land of routing. So we're having real large autonomous systems talking to one another, AWS, Amazon being one, and your own corporate networks being 1, 2, or many potentially, depending on your actual IT footprint. And if you are, I should say, if you're using, again, our partners, this may not be something you actually wind up going down if they're going to sort of own that cross-connect for you and go through the process of exposing via sort of a layer 3 office on your broader MPLS. If they're doing it for you, you really don't have to go down this path. And then from a planning perspective, and again, this will have direct implications on your architecture decisions as you go, you need to plan for about 10 days. So we make a guarantee, or we generally will deliver that LOA CFA or a letter of authorization connecting facility assignment. In short, that's simply the right for someone to walk into a cabinet and plug into a switch and then drop it into another cabinet of your, I should say a router, and drop into another cabinet of your choice. And then after that LOA CFA is generated by us, you provide that to your partner or the colocation facility in question. And generally, that takes about 7 days. So that does mean we are talking about physical things at an actual point in time and space. So that, again, that does factor into our decision-making processes when we architect. And again, if you're using our Direct Connect partners, you may not go through this process. Once the circuit is installed, the service comes up, everything's green, everything's go. We actually have the ability to create 2 different virtual interfaces. I'll just refer to them as VIFs. The first kind of VIF that can be created is to a virtual private cloud. Virtual private cloud VIF will connect to anything that exists inside of a VPC, be it a Redshift cluster, an RDS instance, an EC2 instance, Elasticache cluster, and those artifacts that exist inside of a VPC, internal elastic load balancers, et cetera. To create the private VIF, you have to have a couple of things in place. One, you have to actually provide a unique VLAN that's unused, and you need to have an ASN. Now, you can either use an ASN that you own publicly, perhaps you've got it through Aaron or someone else, or you can bring your own sort of private ASN to it as long as it's in the 65,000 range plus in order to connect. And finally, the VPC, or really the VGW identifier, the virtual gateway identifier that you want to connect to. A couple of things you'll also see there at the bottom of the page is this auto-generation of the BGP key. This is something we actually just added recently. If you have your own BGP key you want to bring to it, it's just a standard MD5 authentication pre-shared key, you can actually bring that. Otherwise, we'll pre-generate one for you, and so you can use that in your configuration down the road. The second kind of VIF that would be created, and I should say as well, for public, or I should say for private VIFs, you can create 1, you can create 2, you can create 20, as really as many VPCs as you have in your account. You can create VIFs for those. Sorry, back up. The second kind you can create is obviously to public services. And public services are, again, anything that we would view as publicly exposed. AWS S3, Amazon Glacier, Amazon DynamoDB. These are all tools that we consider to be public. They also what goes into that bucket is all of our APIs. All of our EC2 public IP space goes into that range. What also goes into that range is everything from Amazon.com that's in that region, which also includes potentially all of our variety of different subsidiary companies that are associated to Amazon.com. Why that's important, and the only reason I tell you that is it's a very large prefix space that's going on that's being advertised back to your devices. And that prefix space is growing over time. As we add new IP space to EC2, as we add new services, as we expand our offerings with new APIs, that will grow over time. And so if you are doing any kind of prefix filtering, just be aware that there can be a situation of where you've filtered out and new IP spaces come on, and you can redirect your traffic over the public internet. Now, we actually do maintain a list, thankfully, of all of the prefixes that we advertise in every single region, and that's on our forum. So if you go to if you do a search for AWS forums for Direct Connect, it's the second or the third link on the page that says what are all of the prefixes that we advertise. And so if you want to set those lists, and we update that regularly and religiously as those change over time. The other thing is the prefix list that is provided. You can provide, I should say, a prefix list of your own that you want to advertise back to us that by default is 20 prefixes. But if you need more, we can actually, like almost everything in AWS, let us know. We can open a ticket and increase that number so you can advertise more prefixes back to us. And then one of the things you also saw on that screen, perhaps, or you thought you saw it, is the ability to share interfaces. So in the past, this was actually a process that you could do by sending a ticket to our team and our AWS Direct Connect team directly. We've actually now exposed this in the console over the last 3 weeks or last 4 weeks to make this easier. So whether your application, or I should say whether your IT operation has, say, a dev, test, and prod account, or it's larger than that, and you have multiple business units and multiple cost centers all wanting to use the exact same cross-connect for AWS Direct Connect, you can do it by simply specifying the owner of the circuits when you create the virtual interface. When you make that request, the owner of those circuits will get a prompt that simply says, do you accept it or not? And when that is accepted, that will turn over from pending to accepted. This is also the mechanism that our partners use to provide hosted virtual interfaces and those sub-gigabit connections to AWS Direct Connect. And also, we, in this process, have made billing and chargeback incredibly easy. So the owner of the circuits themselves are responsible for the circuit costs, but the data transfer now is charged back to the actual accounts that are sharing. So the owner or the requester will now be liable for their own data charges. So if you have complex chargeback requirements within your organization that multiple business units want to use this, that's actually really easy to handle, and we take care of it for you. And lastly, after that VIF is created, you'll actually be able to download the router configuration and hand it to your network ops guys. We provide out of the box Cisco and Juniper device configurations for both the public and the private virtual interfaces. But if you're using something else, if you're using some other device, the great thing is our support team, they're top-notch, and they're willing to get on the phone with you and help you troubleshoot issues that you might be seeing if you have an inability to connect to that virtual interface from your physical devices. So we have a great support team ready to help you in those circumstances. So that's sort of if you wanted to get started immediate. You walked out of here and you said, yes, you know what, this is great. I understand the technical of it. How do I, and I want to start deploying this either on my own. I co-locate in Equinix or CoreSite or IRCOM, or I want to take the next step and talk to my partners, and I want to Level 3 or TW Telecom or Zio, and I want to extend my data center broadly, or extend my data center footprint to include AWS. What are some things that I need to think about when I begin architecting? So there's two primary things that we obviously think that are top of the list for everyone. One is failure, and the second is security. So we would be remiss if we did not repeat this mantra over and over and over to ourselves, the dirty little secret of IT, which is everything fails all the time, right? We hear this, we heard this last year, we heard this year. This is Dr. Werner's, one of his favorite statements, that we assume failure will happen. Network cables will short, ports will fry, entire devices will catch on fire, fall over, and sink into the swamp. Like, these are expectations that we have of all of our devices. It's also important because we're not talking about we're no longer thinking in EC2 where I can simply terminate an instance if it goes bad. I'm now dealing with something that is physical, point in time and space. And so and it takes about 10 days, oftentimes, to get a new circuit provisioned based on the responsiveness of my colocation providers. So obviously, our recommendation is, from the jump, is to provision at least 2 circuits when you begin using AWS Direct Connect. And we actually provide you, we believe that you are uniquely suited for understanding your sort of best case scenario or how you want to route your traffic. So maybe, and maybe your application, your first application is really low risk. Maybe you can transfer a lot of data. If it goes down and you need to replace it, that's no big deal. And maybe you start by using 1 circuit and then grow from there. But when you start looking at really mission-critical business applications that need to be up and need to be interfacing with your on-premises resources, we really recommend having 2 circuits up all of the time. And like I said, we believe you know the best. You know best how you want to route your traffic. So we give you the option. By default, when you create a virtual interface and you have 2 circuits, you'll be able to create that virtual interface across 1, 2, 3, multiple circuits, and configure that in an active-active mode. So it's BGP, right? So BGP is a mechanism. It will always take the shortest path, and so it will multipath that traffic automatically out to you. But we believe that you should have the ability to say, I don't want to multipath my traffic. I instead want to do active-passive with one actively taking all my data and ready to fail over in that circumstance. And you can certainly do that. One of the things that I had mentioned before, not a requirement of your devices, but a recommendation is bidirectional forwarding detection, BFD for short. It's been around for about 10 years. Almost every device now in existence has it. But if you consider routing failures in a BGP environment, most failures sort of at the layer 2 level take about 15 seconds to fail over. By configuring BFD on your devices, whether you're using active-active or active-passive, you can actually, in general, it relies on layer 2 connectivity, put all the forwarding devices and all of the neighbors in the BGP cluster, and it can trip that failover in about a second, oftentimes less. So for truly highly available services, we really recommend having BFD enabled on all of your routing devices in order to catch that failure quickly. But you can even go further, right? You can actually say, I want to control the data, both configure active-active and then go even further. So you can use tools like AS prepath, prepinned path, right, to essentially lie to the service. Because we know BGP takes the shortest route at any given time, we can easily just insert faux hops in the way, and that way we can force traffic to also go active-passive, even if we're configured active-active on the other side. And likewise, we believe that you also know how you want to route your traffic out the best. And so you can configure either active-active or active-passive on the outbound connection from your on-premises to us. And that's by simply configuring a BGP multipathing configuration. So up on the screen, it's if I had 4 circuits, I'm now multipathing across those 4 circuits. We actually have a customer that's doing this and driving, which I'd like to look at briefly, at the end of this, and they're driving 40 gigabits of aggregate data in and out of the US East region. The other thing to think about, because we're talking about things in fixed point in time, is giving yourself headroom. And I'm sure some of you have heard this particular topic come up in other talks, which is, for example, around auto-scaling. You want to be able to give yourself enough headroom to auto-scale your fleet. So you don't want to start auto-scaling at 95%. You want to start auto-scaling at 75%, right? Headroom is just the same when we start talking about these physical devices. So as a general rule, we say if everything that you're doing is mission critical, to target a utilization of 50% or lower, right? That will mean that in the case of a failure, you will be able to fall seamlessly over to one of your circuits and continue to provide truly fault-tolerant performance to your applications. Now, the real benefit here is that I can add circuits because it's an elastic service. I can go from 1 to 2 to 5 to 20. Every single time that I add a new circuit to my AWS Direct Connect pool, I can spread that load out further and increase my utilization numbers. So if I have 3 circuits, I can actually have utilization running about 66%. A singular failure will mean that both of them go to about 99%, and I continue delivering fault-tolerant systems. As I move to 4, I can go to 75%, and that number just continues to go up. So as you are approaching, if you have large bandwidth requirements, we really recommend you go wide as opposed to deep. So multiple 1 gigabit connections as opposed to a single large 10 gigabit connection. It really lets you target this headroom and also really truly maximize your utilization across the pipe. Not just on the designing for failure side, we think the second really important thing that everyone thinks about is security. And it's where everyone starts. It's almost all of my conversations start on security. And just like routing, we actually think that you are uniquely able to make a decision from a business perspective how you want to approach security. So the great thing about AWS Direct Connect, it is a private cross-connect that exists between your on-premises or your co-location facility and AWS. So you're guaranteed that private connection from a security perspective. And if you're connecting it to a VPC, for example, it is both private all the way to our borders and then is logically isolated all the way to the VPC. And so you, again, have that comfort to know that all of the data I'm transacting in and out of my virtual private cloud is secure. Now, the thing to be aware of, though, when you do that, that's not encrypted. But we think that you actually have that, but we actually give you the ability. But again, we think that you know for certain whether or not you want to encrypt that pipe. So whether you may already be using standard SSH, SSL, HTTPS, things that will allow you to use that pipe unencrypted. Or you may simply say, you know, the data that I'm shipping through here, I don't really care that much. It's not critical to my business, or it's data that if it were to leak for whatever reason, not that it would, you could handle it. But the great thing is we provide you the ability to also encrypt that into a VPC. So when you create a VPC, you create a VGW, a virtual gateway. And that virtual gateway is exposed as external IPs, publicly routable IP addresses. So as opposed to creating a private virtual interface, in order to leverage industry standard IPsec in and out of your VPC, you will create a public VIF and create that connection between the public virtual gateway and your on-premises resources. And now your traffic is going to be encrypted in and out of the VPC with the same logical isolation all the way to it, but be encrypted with industry standard IPsec all the way to your instances or resources living inside of the VPC. And lastly, the great benefit here is you own the routing device, right? You actually have the ability to look at your own routing device and then control traffic in and out of it, whether it be via QoS, which you can do, or simply saying, I want to now do deep packet inspection. I want to mirror port one of my interfaces, and I want to do intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, really monitor all of my traffic in and out of AWS. AWS Direct Connect gives you that flexibility because you own the routing endpoint to bring that data in and out. So the last bit here, I just want to talk about another one of our customers that is using AWS Direct Connect. And they're actually not just a customer, but they're a partner of ours. So we've worked very long and hard over the past 7.5 years to provide a lot of storage capability in AWS. From S3 for your write once, read many, to AWS Glacier, Amazon Glacier for your archival data, Elastic Block Store, ephemeral drives, and then our tools like RDS for relational databases, Redshift, you heard about Postgres yesterday, to Elasticache, either Redis or Memcached. So all of these tools we focused on making storage easy and consumable in AWS. But some of you in here have technical requirements. You're using clustered databases. You're needing complex, highly available SAN and NAS infrastructure that may not be readily available. And you're looking at it and saying, how do I do this in AWS? I want to accelerate what I do, but I still have to have these reliance on tools like Oracle RAC, for example. Well, Zadara brings, I think, a unique perspective in here. And they're a very large customer of AWS Direct Connect. But they're really bringing the AWS sales model to you from a storage perspective as well. A unified SAN and NAS storage with subscription-based pricing, either by the spindle, by the gigabyte, by the performance requirement. It's scalable and truly elastic, so I can go in and request more storage and it can be available to me in as little as 5 minutes. And really doing it, again, from the Amazon way of use it while you need it, use only what you need, and when you're done with it, you can deprovision it and give it back and stop paying for it. So this is just their infrastructure that they have currently. The Zadara Cloud A, Zadara Cloud N are actually their highly available, robust, and fault-tolerant storage appliances that are existing inside of our Direct Connect facilities right now. And they present those to your resources as either iSCSI targets or NFS targets that you can consume and use for your highly complex and and your clustered database schemes. They're available in all of the availability zones within those particular regions, and then they even go further and say, you know what, if you need your data to be asynchronously replicated from one region to another, and you don't want to own that process, we'll even take care of it for you and replicate your data for you at a nominal cost. And just some interesting factoids, and this is the reason I wanted to bring them up. They are currently pushing about 100 gigabits of data in and out of AWS in the aggregate across 4 regions. 4 regions, yes. So they have 4 10 gigabit channels in the US East region, and then they have 2 10 gigabit channels and 3 additional ones. You can see them. That would be US West 1, San Jose, EU West 1 in the Dublin, and AP Northeast 1 in Tokyo. Because they're using AWS Direct Connect, they have total separation across their VLANs and network segmentation. And they've managed to maintain an incredibly high uptime over the past 2 years. I think the most interesting piece here really speaks to what they've done and what you can do as well with AWS Direct Connect is this ability to onboard customers. So because everything in AWS, including Direct Connect, is simply an API call, they can take a customer from the point that they click, yes, I'm interested in this service, onboarding that customer, provisioning the software, and creating that virtual interface in as low as 5 minutes. And so I want you to think about that as well. From your infrastructure, can you what if you could very easily establish new VPCs, new virtual interfaces just with a couple of command line calls and some changes to a routing device, and then remove that after the fact when you're done and you want to tear them down. This is just their representative traffic in the US East region. But I want you to just tease that out. So if this is something you're particularly interested in, what I would encourage you to do in the Venetian Bee downstairs in about half an hour, there's actually a talk going to occur, which is NFS and CIFS on AWS, and Zadara will be presenting in there. So if that's something you're interested in, either because from a storage perspective you're interested in, or really understanding how they're leveraging AWS Direct Connect fuller, or in a more full way, I encourage you to go down and take a listen to that conversation that's going to happen. So at this point, I do want to open up the floor up some questions. There is a microphone there, so if anyone does have questions, please proceed to that. And we'll try to answer what we can for about 10 minutes, or less if there's no questions.